Hello everyone, it's Stephen Skripek here in the UK and a warm welcome to TRG 30. A reminder today, if you're joining TRG 30 for the first time, that the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen is your place to go to answer questions through today's virtual roundtable, and we'll make sure we've got plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. You will all receive an email copy of today's presentation as well, and a video of this virtual roundtable for you to enjoy and watch time and time and again. If we don't answer your question live today, don't forget the LinkedIn TRG30 Virtual Network is the place to go to find your answer. We're answering many questions each day on our LinkedIn page there. So welcome. We're back again, and Jill Robinson, our CEO, is here again to guide us through today's 30 minutes.
Hello, thank you, Stephen, and hello everyone again we're into the second month of TRG 30s, where now we are solidly in this last point, thinking about how we revolutionize the way that we act and think and work on behalf of the sector so that it can evolve. A couple, 3 weeks ago, I said this to you, that we will need to be focusing and refocusing regularly. And it feels very much like right now we are in a lens focusing time as we see and are experiencing summer season cancellations, the reconciliation about when, and the questions about how we will begin our seasons at the end of this year and beginning of next. So as we take this moment to refocus, today we will be looking at data and looking at that data so that it might provide us a lens to look at tomorrow, especially as it relates to content. And it's important to recognize that there are holes, aren't there? There are holes in our programmatic season. There are definitely holes in our revenue streams. At TRG, you know, we are bullish on, believe in this sector's critical why in our communities. And so this hole looks to the sky on purpose to help you see that while we want to acknowledge what we're seeing and facing, we also should be looking in bright ways toward what our futures could evolve to. Today's content wants to head us there, while acknowledging this: distribution channels. Our distribution channels of historic theaters and performing arts centers, museums, physical buildings, that has shifted overnight. But as you're going to see in the data, our patron relationships have not. And so how we reconcile behavioral change with people and the way that they're connecting with us, with our strategy and how we connect with them, that is the subject of today. Let's start with a little bit of external data. The Intellectual Property Office of the UK government, there's an interesting similar kind of report that McKinsey & Company just put out in the US, but they are tracking consumer behavior, online consumer digital behavior in multiple waves. This is the report from the first one. And it reports that there's big increases in the use of online tools for learning, but also for participation in our sector. Museum, virtual and collection tours, 30% increase in theater and concerts and dance online. This is good news. And we've seen this on our own sites. And yet, this is also true. Most of this content is free. Now, it's brilliant. And it's getting more brilliant. The National Theater, you likely have tuned in along with others as they've released their really extraordinary content and made that available, their most popular from their archives. The San Francisco Ballet here in the United States, sharing pieces from their archive, this one like this one, The Infinite Ocean. The National Gallery has made available tours of their halls and collections in a very sophisticated way. And then there's what we're seeing online on Zoom. that are touching and heartwarming and exciting to see the personal lives and performance of artists like the horn players from the Colorado Symphony doing their rendition of "Don't Stand So Close to Me," the Police song, and this. Boy, if you haven't watched this, the students and friends of Juilliard who've done this extraordinary rendition of Bolero, it's really awesome, but all free. And things are changing. Things are shifting as it relates to free. There's a pivot that's happening. Forbes reported on it on the 28th. And they also reminded us about how in the US, the entertainment industry is 4.5% of GDP. The nonprofit sector as a whole is the third largest workforce in the country. There is a lot at risk here as it relates to our sector and the broader entertainment sector. And as a result of that risk and the pressure and the needs that we all have, things are changing in terms of how this product is being distributed and what value that it's able to create. This article spoke of the Jonathan Tollin show, Buyer and Seller. A group of Broadway producers mounted this online revival, and it raised $200,000 for the Broadway Cares Equity Assistance Fund for AIDS and COVID. The New York Times on the 4th of May, there's 5 examples here where each are offered, let me go back there, each is offered behind minimal, but a paywall or a data wall, as you see with the last one in the Theater of War Productions. Change, right? The Wallace Annenberg Center for the Performing Arts in Hollywood has partnered with Hershey Felder, and there's a group of theaters that he has produced to do a story of Irving Berlin, each $50, and hundreds of households are participating in that market that way. In Suffolk, in England, the Original Theatre Company is making very formal its theater online and has gotten the attention of the press in the UK. In Santa Fe, art tours, online art tours, behind a paywall, $10 per visit. So things are shifting here as we look to the longer term, and that's what we want to talk about, bring your attention to, and suggest some strategy around. So let's get grounded in the data. You know and remember that we have made available to the sector something we're calling the COVID-19 sector benchmark. It's free for participation, enables this kind of not only benchmarking and analysis, but a tool for lobbying. Yes, Stephen, right? And perhaps attention getting in your local or regional or indeed national markets. And there's really interesting data coming from the benchmark today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important for us to take a breath to go back to that data, particularly in the context of what we're talking about today, to understand a bit about who we were going to serve this year in 2020 in our organizations. Now, we have been talking a lot about when will patrons come back? When will they come back? And what about our communication strategies to encourage that? We've got almost 200 organizations data in our COVID-19 sector benchmark now, and enough to split here the data between UK and US. So as we step through these few slides, UK eyes to the left, US eyes to the right in how we're presenting this data. And there's an important moment to acknowledge here. In all of our patrons that attended in 2019, the blue segments of these two pie charts represent who came back in 2019. So between 2/3 to half of our patrons, depending on where we live, were not going to be engaging in ticket buying activity anyway in 2020. So where were we expecting our 2020 revenue to come from? Not new patrons. This slide shows the proportion of revenue we were expecting from each loyalty segment returning from 2019 into 2020. And these segments are split into 7. This is in our purple 7 segmentation parlance. But it's really, really important to look at these buckets of revenue, particularly new customers. In 2020, we were expecting our new customers to account for 18% or 23% of our revenue. That's right, in the UK, we rely on new customer revenue less than the US. I was surprised by that data point, actually, Jill. And why is this important to think about right now? It should be making a big difference to your strategic plans and segmentation for content and engagement right now. So if it's not new customers, where is that revenue expectation sat? This chart shows the actual amount patrons in each segment returning from 2019 into 2020 have spent as a percentage of the amount we expected them to spend. So UK is in the purple color here, US in the blue. And look at our super actives. And I just want to remind you, super actives, who they are. They are patrons that have engaged at least 10 times in ticket buying activity historically, and at least once in the last 18 months. So they've visited us frequently and have visited us recently. Proportionately, we really rely on these folks as a percentage of our revenue. And right now in our ticketing systems in the benchmark group, they're sat at over 140% of overall expected 2020 revenue, more than we expected them. Now, some of this was generated pre-COVID. Some of it has been generated post, where we've really, really leaned in on asking our loyalists to activate on our subscriptions or memberships or ticket buying futures campaigns right now. Your loyalists were and are fueling everything.
And there's risk here, right? I mean, the pivot that I think this content and our conversation wants to take is to acknowledge that we have engaged these patrons. And as we look to the next 6 to 12 months and we look at the question, how will we continue to secure this income and not have it turn into refunds? This is a key question.
I think there's 2 things actually here, Jill, which is the first of all, you talked about our digital strategy being free. Is it serving those who aren't invested in our organizations right now? A question. Right. And to your point, exactly, how are we going to retain this loyalist revenue if our seasons and productions in 2020 cancel? We need content to keep them engaged and invested.
Right. We need to address both. So we do have to get strategic here. So here's what we want you to be considering and doing. Right now, we want you to assess your current digital strategy and the associated results from that strategy. So let's gather around our screens or whatever other way we are going to be in touch with our teams. And this is the who. This is a strategic issue about how we're going to distribute our services, our products, our why, our reason for being. How are we going to distribute that over the next 6 to 12 months? So we need all key leadership around the table, and we need to start answering, you need to start answering these questions about the content that you've developed and have advanced so far. First, whom does it serve and how? Are we segmenting the community, which we know we need to connect with, and likely that's for free? And how is that different than our less active patrons on whom we were not counting for a large proportion of income? And how is that content different from those actives and super actives whom we need to not only retain in relationship, but whose revenue we need to be seated in and retain? Key question, whom does it serve? Are we segmenting? Does it align with our mission? Are we satisfied with the technical quality? And if not, how transparent can we be with our patrons about the plans that we have to change that? Are we under appropriately over investing here? And most importantly, do we know what success looks like? Is it clicks and likes? Or is it something more? Data, income. If you like all your answers, then let's dig in. Let's dig in and start to create plans that answer these questions. Who's the digital team? How often are you going to gather? Stephen, we at TRG organize our clients around weekly, sometimes bi-weekly revenue pacing meetings that are focused on our events and how they're pacing and what we're seeing in the data. We have to do the same thing now related to our digital content. We need digital pacing meetings. What's the next best engagement based on segmentation now of that digital content, keeping what Stephen just described in mind? We were only counting on this proportion of income from new patrons. How are we segmenting and managing that content? Are we optimizing the revenue potential, even of that which we're distributing for free? Are there opportunities for sponsors to help us with that free content, help us make it possible and funded? Are there new distribution channels that we could consider with other partners? Could we, the theater company, partner with the library, partner with the museum, and share distribution channels and content even? And if you don't have the tech you need, who does? Could you come together in the community to create it, get it? These are some of the questions that your plan wants to consider. If you do that initial analysis or deep dive and you don't like your answers, then we've got to change something. Start doing something different. So now might be the time to pause and ask the question: what are our goals with this digital content? What do we think we're facing over the next 6 to 12 months? What is needed to reach the segments that we need to in the right way? Again, being mindful of the patrons that are over invested right now compared to what we expected. And how are we connecting with and serving their needs as well as the broader communities? Is there a better platform than the content that you're distributing now? What is the revenue potential? Partners, resources, content adjustment. This question about digital content distribution has become one of the most striking and strategically important conversations we are having with our clients and we want to have with you. We've used this race metaphor with hurdles, and boy, we have them. And we have to focus and refocus, pivot and repivot through it. But what's very clear is that the distribution channels that we have counted on have been disrupted, and we can no longer afford to think of our digital content as a way to broadly stay in touch until things return to normal. The normal will be new. The normal, hopefully, will evolve as we experiment, test, try, partner, get creative, think about that hole in the sky on behalf of our sector. Stephen, I will love to see what kind of questions we might have or conversations we should be having now.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, the time to submit your questions is now in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We've kept good time for questions today because we know there's a lot of provocation here. And actually, Jill, the questions that are coming in are very how oriented right now. Yeah. So before I take those, there's a couple of clarification questions in the data section and some of the early part of the presentation. What does it mean to be behind a paywall or a data wall? And this really is and you can see it, how it operates on our website. It's really an opportunity to, a physical, metaphorical wall, as it were, to collect something, whether it be revenue or whether it be data, the ability to provide something in return for, and should be, with the tools that are available out there, relatively easy to integrate into your websites. There are options out there to enable that. The original theatre company example that you shared, Jill, used Vimeo's platform to integrate the pay option for that content.
We've also just learned of an interesting company that I would recommend you all take a look at. It's Canadian, called Side Door, that uses the Zoom platform for artists. So you'll see when you go, independent artists there, but the opportunity for performance that is behind some kind of either data requirement or paid requirement. So tech companies are becoming nimble and are supporting our need for live performance that we can manage in a different way.
Okay, Joe, well, let's dig into these questions. And
Yeah.
the first, thank you, Howard. The idea of digital content makes sense, but what about for presenting organizations? How would they do this if they present the programs that they don't own or create? And I imagine there's a few people listening right now that are in this, they're in this boat.
Right, so the example from the Wallace Annenberg Center in Hollywood provides a really good one, Hershey Felder and his partnership. There's no easy answer to this, and what we're hearing are partnerships, local collaboration. It's going to require creativity. Presenters are faced with enormous challenges right now because the business model is built on the receipt of product. I'd be reaching out to agents and finding out who is able to, who has content they can share. It is, I don't have a quick and easy answer other than we need to get creative, start talking aggressively with agents and artists themselves, and consider, again, what kind of local partnerships might enable you to deliver arts content to your patrons that is different in the short term.
Jane has said that she shared side door concert information with our clientele, and she's in Canada, and the comments back are great. I'm glad to see something that ensures the musicians are paid. And everyone is in this sense of, the word's not selfish, right? But people can behave like that in this moment when we're all looking at this whole. And I think it's interesting that the principles of our relationships with artists, our relationships with producers and promoters are not different just because the distribution channel has changed. And Jill, I wonder if there's any advice you'd offer in that situation where, and I think this is going to happen the other side of this, right? When particularly in the presenting market, deal structures will need to be renegotiated with a potentially more challenging revenue split. What needs to change in the conversation?
Boy, this is another really important conversation. The container in which artists work today, pre-COVID, has lots of reasonable, for historic reasons, protections and care built in. And now we find ourselves going, oh my gosh. In countries like Canada and the US, artists are left, UK maybe as well, artists are left without an income stream. And so as we've been having conversations with dance and theater and symphony orchestras, the question about how we share rights, how we break free from some of the constraints that enable us to perform now, to generate income now, share digitally now, that must change. And I think you're right. On the other side of this, deal structures in the sort of receiving and presenting world will be different. Deal structures with our artists will be different, but my hope is that we can engage in a different way that shares our mutual need to distribute and perform, and that we can use this opportunity to evolve the way that we work together. And prior to the crisis, there just wasn't, I think, a big enough incentive. And boy, do we have one now. So I'm glad someone has asked that question, and that will be an ongoing part of this dialogue. No question about it.
No, absolutely. Helen's asked an interesting provocation here, which is, should theatres start to budget to hire media creators to give us
yes,
content to distribute digitally in the future?
Yes.
We talked about these digital channels are not just for now.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, today, that's why we want you to be thinking so strategically about it, because today it's a requirement. What does it mean? What does it mean to contracts? What does it mean to artists? And let's begin with the end in mind. We all believe in live performance. We believe profoundly in the power of live performance, and that will come back. But to ignore the opportunity in front of us to invest in the way that Helen has asked about, so that we might imagine this large boomer population that in both North America and the UK in the next decade is reaching the pivot point of their own age where arts participation, physical arts participation, is going to decline. Well, technology could enable our ongoing connection. Technology could enable us to talk to younger households and people differently too, engage them in different ways. It's impossibly difficult to imagine now because we've got these big holes in our revenue streams. But the best among us will think creatively so that we can be these gorgeous and grown entities on the other side, a gorgeous and grown sector on the other side.
Yeah, I think Sam Biscoe says here, do you think that we've uncovered a new way for people to engage with the arts that perhaps were too scared to attempt because so much of it is a live experience? And, you know, the proportion of people that engage frequently is very small. We see that very clearly in there's a long tail opportunity of engagement here, which can lead to, with the right relationship cultivation, a move into the live experience.
Right. And, you know, at the risk of sounding like a hello to Sam, and at the risk of sounding like a lecturer here, I mean, there have been fears in our lives before. Blockbuster Video in the States and Netflix and movie theaters with Beta and VHS. I'm old enough to remember those experiments. And we still will want to be together. We still will commune together. I think this is a 1 + 1 = 3, not a subtracting time. So I'm gonna, I don't know if there's another question. I want to announce our next TRG 30, Stephen.
I'm gonna challenge you to a 60-second quick fire response, Jill.
Okay.
Stefano from Italy, if you're a presenting organization, can you imagine a geographical limitation to distribution to your catchment area so you don't overlap other presenters?
Well, I can. That's super interesting. So the deal structures, how does that work? And does it matter? What will competition look like?
Are there?
Yeah, right.
The provocation is there. Should there be ticket price differences between live and live digital performances?
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. We need a whole section on this. Like, what are the variables? Pricing, competition. I can imagine incentives that we create, although I'm unsure. You know, one last thought. I was watching a show recently that talked about, it was fiction, but it talked about the 1920s in the US, which was the Roaring 20s. It was the Roaring 20s after the Spanish flu, after the war, after the polio epidemic. And the Roaring 20s were an enormous time of creativity. Theater building, as we heard from Byron at Charcoal Blue, people were busting to come back to be together and be creative together. So I know that this will happen, but the clever of us will ask these questions, and we ought to be clever together. Let's be clever together, all of you on TRG 30. And next week, I want to say to you that, speak of clever, our guest is going to be Oscar Eustace, who's the artistic director of the Public Theater, the largest theater company in the US, one of the most important companies globally. And Oscar and I are going to talk about that future. Oscar, if you've watched his TED Talks, is an inspiring voice. He believes in this future. And his organization is about managing polarities and being wildly creative. I can't wait to be with him and with all of you as we make these kinds of provocations. He'd be a good one to ask these kind of questions of in real time. Always, Stephen, a reminder about these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jill, there's some great questions in here, which I promise you, if we've not answered, we'll be considering in future content. And if we don't answer it on TRG 30 Virtual Network, I do think there's some good stuff here for us to provocate around on here. So thank you.
I look forward to it.
Two things. Yes, the TRG 30 Virtual Network is the place to join. We're also going to send you an email asking for your feedback on these sessions. And it's really, really important in helping to shape the future content. So please do take 30 seconds out of what we know are your busy times right now to give your feedback. We read every single response, and it does form our planning for future content. Thank you to everyone for joining us today.
Thank you.
And we will see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.